lesson of our digital training on public procurement in USA and Canada. And this is a digital training related to our Extra Light project that aims to foster European lighting SMEs participation in public procurement. Extra Unite Europe, for sure. We have also furniture because we have also the Upper Austria BISAP cluster with us, so our scope a little larger. What the goals of our digital training is to have 3 modules, one on general features in public procurement USA, Canada, eligibility requirements, assessment criteria USA and Canada in module 2, and meet the buyer and build partnership and know the competitors in module 3. Okay, so we have a quite long route together to well understand the public procurement in the US and Canada. This lesson was all 2 days ago, 25, so I put just okay for this first lesson. Now we are lesson 2, and is the second part on the Canadian market about the general features. And after you have all the calendar that we have already published, but I will invite you to note all the dates and follow the social, our social networks, email, and so on to enter in the different lesson we are planning in the next 2-3 months. Okay, this was our first module. Today is second part of module 1. And I really thank you, Jonathan Hebert, to be with us. And so the topics for today is the introduction to Procurement Canada Agency, managing of building tenders for the federal bodies, onboarding of the new SAP Ariba system, how to benefit from the CATI agreement, the different type of tenders, open tender qualified Canadian content, and how to answer to tenders. So with the list of attending. So for ELCAM, I'm here with I'm president of ELCAM, Lucian Veneto. We are here with Marta Krakowiak, that is our project manager, and with an important role in coordination in Extra Light project. Antonella Venza, that is cluster manager Lucian Veneto. From Cluster Lumiere, I see Mary IDD connected. I know if every cluster manager are going to attend today, and just waiting also from maybe from CCAT that is coming now with Marisol Esteban, project manager, and from BKC that Stefan what is connected for the cluster. We have also some companies that are connected now, and we hope to have more companies connected. For the general engagement in the meetings, I really ask all to the people to really take part in the lesson, following the rules from Jonathan about how to work together today, and it's possible maybe to let your camera switch on to have a more face-to-face engagement during our meeting. You know, we are running digital training, but it's more, if you want, informal workshops to let all people to have a constant dialogue with our speakers and to benefit at maximum of the information we are collecting from Canadian now, and in the next lessons from the US market about public procurement. So I just stop my introduction. It's 10 minutes after 2 p.m. and I really hope some people more for companies can join us. But I remember that we are registering, recording the lessons, because yeah, we want to have a common layer of lesson that we can share with companies that can attend today from our clusters, to give them the availability of these materials and to go deeper in the field of public procurement. So thank you very much again for connecting people, and I give the floor to Jonathan for the lesson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto. So yes, and very quickly, as you know now, after our discussion on Tuesday, Canada is organized in different level of government, and at the federal level, there is an agency called Procurement Assistance Canada, who's in charge of all the federal tenders, but are also able to communicate on the provincial and some municipal tenders, especially the ones that are qualified or are covered, to use a proper term, under CETA. I met with Jonathan a few months ago at a trade show, and I was actually with another European delegation. And so we had a great discussion about public procurement in Canada, and I thought it would just be the perfect person to give you a bit more insight about the federal tenders and walk you through not only the process, but also through the platform, which is a key in that in tracking and answering the different tenders. So with no further delay, please welcome Jonathan. And Jonathan, the floor is yours. And again, thank you very much for taking the time this morning. This morning for us. All yours, Jonathan.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here and get going from beginning. Okay, you folks able to see my screen there? Good. Okay,
yes,
excellent.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, good morning for me, good afternoon for you folks in Europe. My name is Jonathan Hebert. I'm here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. If you're aware of a little bit of Canadian geography, that's on the east coast of Canada, closer to you folks in Europe. So I'm perhaps an hour closer to you than Jan, who is in central Canada. So I work here for, as you can see on my banner behind me, I work for Procurement Assistance Canada, as Jan mentioned. Procurement Assistance Canada is my team. The department, the ministry that I work for is also noted here, Public Services and Procurement Canada. So in Canada, we have, as Jan mentioned, different levels of government. I work for the federal government for the country, and we're organized in a number of departments and agencies, hundreds, in fact, of various different departments that do different things like healthcare, defense, immigration, various different federal responsibilities. So the department I work for, Public Services and Procurement Canada, we do a lot of public work type things like building maintenance and real property and certain things like in relation to that, but also we do procurement. So Procurement Canada would be the section of the department that I work for. So today I'm going to give you a good overview of federal procurement. We have about 4 to 5 different webinars that we offer online, standard webinars. And so what I've done is I've kind of taken some material from those 4 webinars and I've put them together into one longer session here for you today. So we'll see how it goes. I haven't done this exact order before. We'll see how the information flows today, but it's a fairly informal session from my perspective. So I do welcome your questions. I'm not sure exactly how it works with the Zoom, but you can put up your hand. You can just take yourself off of mute and ask a question. I have no problem with that at any time. And also, if you like, if we're on a certain topic and you'd like to ask a question while we're on that topic, please do so. It is a little easier to kind of keep things focused in one area.
Jonathan?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. And so, yeah, what we did on Tuesday, we had people putting their question in the chat, or asking a question directly, opening their mic. So you can do either one. If the questions come through the chat, and because when we're presenting, it's not easy to see, I will let you know when there's a question in the chat. But I mean, it's fine to use the chat, but we're a small group, so please also open your mic and ask the question directly to Jonathan. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem, and that's absolutely the case. Also, I know languages can be tricky across the world, so if I speak too quickly or if you have difficulty understanding anything I say, please do ask me to repeat myself. I may do the same for you if you ask me a question, so we're on the same page with that. Je parle français aussi, alors si vous avez des questions en français, je parle français. So without further ado, I'll jump into my presentation here, Introduction to Federal Procurement. All right, getting started. Okay, so Procurement Assistance Canada, it's the team that I work on. If you have been in and around the Canadian landscape before, you may have heard of our team. We used to be called the Office of Small and Medium Enterprises. It's because we're there to assist small and medium, particularly small and medium businesses with federal government procurement. In 2019, we went through a rebranding and we received a lot of federal funding from the budget. We were rebranded to be called Procurement Assistance Canada. And our mandate was altered a little bit. We're still there for all small and medium businesses across Canada and around the world. However, our mandate has been focused on looking for diversity in our supply chain. So the current federal, this is the biggest piece of information I'll share with you today, and you'll see it come throughout the presentation, is that a big focus for federal procurement from this current government has been to switch up our supply chain and offer more opportunities for diverse businesses. So there are opportunities for all businesses to be part of the supply chain and working with diverse businesses. So that's going to be a key component that we're going to talk about today. Indigenous business, Black business, women, LGBTQ2+, persons with disabilities. These are the priorities of the federal government going forward, and there will be business opportunities for companies who work with businesses in Canada from those backgrounds. So we were created as part of PSPC. I will say PSPC a number of times today because you don't want to hear me say my department name over and over. PSPC is Public Services and Procurement Canada. We were created to assist small and diverse businesses with federal procurement. Our role is to engage with businesses and assist and inform them on how to sell their goods and services to the Government of Canada, and to work to reduce procurement barriers in an effort to ensure fairness in the process. So we do this by offering seminars, webinars like this. Jan has been to a few of our webinars here in Canada. Today, you're kind of getting an exclusive look into our 4 different webinars that we offer, but we also do these across Canada for Canadian businesses. We meet one-on-one with businesses. We go to many events. This is where I ran into Jan here in Halifax at an Ocean Tech trade show, where we promote our services as well. So that's a little bit about me. Personally, I've been with the Canadian government just over 17 years. I've worked here in Halifax and in Ottawa for various government departments, most recently the Canadian Coast Guard, and I started here at PSPC in June of this year. Okay. Okay, so over the last few years, the total value of procurement contracts awarded by the Government of Canada amounted on average to 23 billion Canadian dollars. 74% of those contracts, of that 23 billion Canadian, are managed by my department, Public Services and Procurement Canada. Not me myself, I am not a buyer, so I can't buy any of your products, but there are buyers in my department who would do a lot of those procurements. I say 74% was managed by us because the rest of the 26% of contracts are managed directly by departments and agencies across Canada. So all of the other federal departments. We'll talk a little bit about how that works in some upcoming slides. However, on average, small businesses have won about 54% of the total value of Canadian contracts. So our commitment to small and medium businesses is a big commitment, and we buy most of our goods in Canada and most of our services from small and medium enterprises. Okay, let's start by talking about the potential opportunities. Each year, the government of Canada spends billions of dollars by awarding hundreds of thousands of contracts and making well over 1 million direct credit card purchases. This represents a huge potential market. Like I mentioned, 23 billion annually on goods, services, construction, and maintenance projects. Construction is a large field for federal government here in Canada. We have a lot of federal construction projects, which may be different than a lot of other countries, because other countries there may be more participation from local governments in construction projects. And while that is true in Canada, the federal government is involved in many building, road, and other construction projects across Canada. We'll keep going here. And so we're increasing the diversity, contracting with the Government of Canada. So we are the main contracting body, Public Services and Procurement Canada. Canada believes that competition in the buying process brings the best value for money to Canadians. More than anything, it's important to the government that all procurement activities be conducted in an open, fair, and transparent manner, and that all suppliers have an equal chance at doing business with us. Federal laws and regulations, as well as Treasury Board of Canada policies, guide the Government of Canada's procurement process in order to assure sound financial management of public policy. So there's we're also, as I mentioned, we're looking to increase the diversity of our bidders. So one of the big things you're going to hear about public procurement in Canada is particularly the increasing the diversity of bidders in regards to Indigenous participation. So for folks from other countries, Canada has been going through a very large reconciliation process for the last many years, but particularly the last decade with Indigenous Canadians. And so there has been a commitment by the federal government for a number of different aspects of federal government towards reconciliation, but specific towards procurement is there has been a 5% set aside of all federal procurement. 5% of this must go to Indigenous business. This is a goal. This is our first year working on this, but this is going to be something that you're going to see evolve over the next number of years, and you may see it involve other different diverse groups. Why do I say this to you? I'm sure we don't have Indigenous business on the line here today. However, there are many opportunities in Canada to work with local business. This is one of the best ways to get into the Canadian market, is to do business with a Canadian business. So we have an example of many European worldwide businesses that have made joint ventures with Indigenous business here in Canada. And that is a very successful way to gain access to federal contracts, is to work with local Indigenous communities. So I'll put that out there. It looks different in every sector, of course, depending on what you're selling, the goods and services. But examples, a good example right now is a large construction project here we have in the East Coast in Moncton. Pomerleau, a large construction company, is going to build a very large building science facility for the Government of Canada. And Pomerleau, which is not an Indigenous business, it's just a construction business, has agreed that 23% of their construction work for that project will go to Indigenous business. By committing that, they won the contract. So that's a point for all of you to think about. Overall, having a presence in Canada and making partnerships here is a way to go. First of all, we'll talk about a bit about that when I get to my international considerations section. However, Indigenous business would be one to certainly consider. You also see on the list green procurement. Another priority for the Government of Canada is green procurement. And so this has been going on for a number of years, kind of started in the late 2000s, 2008, 2010, around there. We brought in our green procurement strategy. And so through our various different types of competitive procurement, there's different ways that we calculate who wins a contract, and we're going to go through that today. But one way to get yourself more points in a project like that is to include any elements related to green procurement. It can be anything from a simple thing of not printing any documents related to the process and doing everything electronic, to how you transport your workers to a work site, to how many greenhouse gas emissions are involved in the manufacturing of your product, to how your transport of your product. All of these things, the more green considerations you can put into your bid, the more points you're going to get.
Jonathan?
Yep. Yes.
I have a question for you. So going
Sure.
back to the indigenous business,
Mhm.
For a company from Europe that's interested to joint venture, how do you identify those business? Are they listed somewhere in Procurement Canada? Maybe if you could address that.
Sure, absolutely. And this is an evolving matter. So what I will tell you today may look very different next year because we're in the process of changing. But currently there is the Indigenous Business Directory. We call it the IBD, Indigenous Business Directory. It's not maintained by my department. It's maintained by Indigenous Services Canada, which is the federal department that gives services to Indigenous people. In order to be considered an Indigenous business, you have to be registered on that directory. How that is happening is changing. There is a call in Canada to have Indigenous communities be in charge of the directory versus the federal government being in charge. So I expect this to evolve. But today, there is a directory that has business. I'll be the first one to tell you that not all Indigenous businesses are on that list. And it is very possible to find and make connections with Indigenous business and find out they're not on the list. And to get themselves on the list. But what I see is when I see people coming to like the conference we went to, Jan at H2O, or DefSec conference I just went to recently in Halifax, is businesses are coming from Europe. They're speaking with the Indigenous people they can see in those conferences. They're making connections and they're trying to have joint ventures with Indigenous business. That is happening at every event I go to now. That is a big thing that we're moving towards. So yes, there is a directory for Indigenous business, but don't limit yourself to that, is what I'm saying. There's more. And how you find those, there's a number of different ways. You can go through Indigenous organizations. One thing with Indigenous Canadians that I'll share with our European colleagues is that we often refer to Indigenous people as one group, but they are many, many, many groups. There are Inuit, there are First Nations, there are Métis, there are regions across the Canada, different regions across Canada. So how different regions of Canada approach their Indigenous populations and how they are organized is different. So I know that's a hard answer, but use the directory and think outside the box after that.
No, thank you very much. And I think the IBD is a very good way to start,
Yes.
especially when you're based in Europe. So thank you for that.
No problem. Okay. All right, so now moving into the meat of things here, finding opportunities. So the very first thing to kind of understand in Canada is how do we do our purchasing? I mentioned previously that 74% of purchasing is done by my department, Public Services and Procurement Canada. But again, 26% is done by departments directly. So how does that work? The way it works is the larger contracts, so for goods over 25,000 Canadian dollars, and for services up to 2 million, construction projects up to 400,000, the government departments can buy goods up to those amounts. So for anything that's above that, for large contracts, Public Services and Procurement are managing those contracts on behalf of the other federal departments. So for example, if the Department of Fisheries and Oceans or the Coast Guard wants to go out and buy a number of buoys to go put in the wall for their program, if those are under $25,000, if they're just going to buy one, they can just go out and purchase that. They don't need to have a competitive procurement process. And we'll talk about that in a moment, but also they can make that purchase directly themselves. If the goods were above $25,000, it would go to a public tender. Process would be posted by Public Services and Procurement, my department, and we would run the procurement for that department. The department is still the subject matter experts. Like I don't put buoys in the water and tend to buoys, but the Coast Guard does. So they're the experts. They would tell us what they need, but we are the experts in contracting, in procurement and that type of thing. So you would see my department working with whichever department is the lead to do that public procurement. So to understand those two worlds is kind of the most important part for federal procurement. You have competitive procurement, where goods above 25,000, and on this slide it says 2 million for services. That's for what departments can buy themselves. However, for any competition for services above $40,000, there has to be a competitive procurement process. So we call that competitive procurement, and we'll go through all the different types of competitive procurement in a few moments. For anything below those thresholds, we call low dollar value procurement. For many companies, a contract of 20,000 Canadian dollars is not necessarily low dollar value. For a small business, that can be a considerable amount of money. But for the purposes of our procurement, we call that low dollar value procurement. Okay, so now we're gonna go in to talk a little bit about those two different types of competitive procurement and low dollar value procurement, because how you approach doing business in those two different worlds are completely different. So we're gonna talk a bit about that. Building networks. So while it's fundamental principle of government procurement that all processes be transparent, open, and fair, for purchases under the threshold levels that I mentioned, it can be helpful to strategically connect with officials in departments and agencies to learn about what directions their department procurement may be heading. So you can market your business directly to government buyers. Generally speaking, government buyers can engage with businesses directly for low dollar value procurement, so up to 25,000 or above 40,000 for services. Over those thresholds, they're going to go to a competitive procurement process. Most purchases over the threshold amounts are managed by PSPC through the National Goods and Services Procurement Strategy. Remember that it's a very competitive market and you'll want to distinguish yourself from the crowd. So networking is important. Making connections in departments, it can be important. Often there is a disconnect sometimes between, from personal experience working at the Coast Guard, sometimes there is a disconnect between those who are actually using the stuff, the subject matter experts, and the people who are buying. They're often in different worlds and doing different things. So how you make those connections, it can be beneficial to make connections with people who are working in the field, subject matter experts, because they're the ones that are going to go to Procurement Canada or their procurement officers and say, we have a requirement for this good or this service. Sometimes people don't know about the technology that is out there. So they're not going to put out a request for proposal to purchase your product if they don't know that your product exists. So doing that marketing is important. It's not easy. It's not easy to do that, to make connections, but it is vital. Now, how do you do that? It can be hard when you're not here. It's tough internationally. So one thing is to attend events. You can go to international conferences or things like that. Come to Canada and meet with people from government that you can. I do that all the time. So at various trade shows I go to, I see lots of European business from the UK, from Europe, from Asia that come and make connections in Canada. That can be an important way to do things. When I run into people from government, because the government's a really big beast, I call it, I like to find out where they work, what kinds of goods and services do they buy in that department, to try to figure out if there is an in where that might be helpful to me.
If I may just jump on that, Jonathan. I think it's very important for you guys to understand that every time you attend a show, there is a big part of the attendees who are representative of the different governments. I mean, if you go to a show in Canada, there's a good chance you're going to walk into representative of different agencies and so on. So yeah, 100% agree with Jonathan on the fact that it's a great way to network. And on my presentation on Tuesday, if you remember, I insisted on the fact that networking is the base of doing business in Canada. And so it's true at all the levels from private to public.
Yep, that's a good point. And you're absolutely right, Jan. When you go to these events, it's not just me that's going to be there. It'll be me, and you'll see National Defence, and you'll see Innovation Canada, and you'll see the economic development agencies and all the various different federal departments. They often lump us together. They put us in a government row, they'll call, and they'll put all the government desks in a row at a show like that. And it's a good opportunity to make connections for sure. Also, there is a way you can do this online. It's not foolproof, it's not perfect, but it's there. So GEDS is the Government Electronic Directory Service. It's a public directory. So if you pull up that site and you put my name in it, you would get all my information, my contact information, where I work, my all that information. You could do that for anybody. However, you can also use it to find contacts. So there is an advanced search feature. You can go in and use keywords. You can search by their title, by their department, and different things like that. It's tough. You have to work with it a little bit because every department organizes their information differently. And you have to be a little bit of imaginative of think of, okay, what would the title of someone be who I'm trying to contact? There could be, like, obviously procurement officer is a good one. Procurement would be in the title. However, when you start talking about engineers or building maintenance people or different groups that may be in charge of the goods or services that you offer, you may have to get inventive with language to think about how you may find these folks. Some departments are better at others at keeping their information up to date. I've gone in there and find myself previously 2 jobs, behind with my contact information. So it depends. So don't treat it as if it's the Bible or it's perfect, but it is a good way to make connections. Government employees are used to being contacted by folks like you. So you may have someone jump on your idea and say, this is great, and thank you for contacting me, or you may never hear from them. Don't take it personal. It's business. You get lots of people that contact, but you feel comfortable to do so. There's only so many ways to get your product in front of people's faces, and that is one way to do it.
And so, yeah, we had actually on Tuesday that discussion. I think Marta was asking about what is
exactly.
what is okay to be done, and I learned something that in Italy they have a specific email which is kind of an official email, which is almost like a stamp letter. But I don't believe we have such a thing in Canada.
Yeah,
correct?
it's something that the businesses in Italy took exchange with the public authorities. They are strongly invited to use the so-called certified emails. It's like the official email assigned to the, let's say, to the companies or to the private professionals who works as, let's say, as professionals. So it's not like Gmail or the name of the company. It's like a verified mailing box that the public authority is sure that it belongs to exactly to the company they are saying it belongs to.
Okay.
So the question was very specific, just asking if there is something like this, or we can, for example, to contact you, use our normal mailing addresses. And the second question was if it's, let's say, well seen, also if it's one of the uses to contact the public officers directly, for example, to ask for some information or ask if there are some events. And if they are answering, because we have different experience in Europe at this point. So
great. Yeah, so there the answer is kind of all over for that one. There's no official email or anything you have to use to contact. The way it works is most teams in government will have an email address for their team. So like my example, Procurement Assistance Canada Atlantic, we have a general email address that all of us have access to. So when you see, promotional material out there for my team, you'll see my team's email everywhere and we have access. But then also all individual employees have a government email. I'll put mine here in the chat just so you can kind of see what it looks like. It's always going to be their first name dot their last name. If there's multiples, it'll put 1, 2, 3 if it's the multiple person. And then it normally puts the department name. Now mine is complicated. You see all those letters in there. It's French and then English, or English or French. It depends on where the headquarters of the department is. My department is in Gatineau, Quebec, so it's French first. TPSGC-PWGSC. That's the old name, legal name of my department that doesn't exist anymore. And then you see .gc, governmentcanada.ca. So if you see email addresses in that format, it's mostly what the government employees look like. Some have @canada.ca. There was a push for a while to have us all move to @canada.ca, but departments didn't like that because you don't have your identity of your department in your email anymore. So you'll find those contacts on GEDS. You can use them. You can use your regular business email, your personal email, whatever you wish. Of course, the more official you look, the more someone is probably likely to pay attention to you. Will they answer? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, Jan said something. Jan said something very diplomatic last time. He said that the Canadians in general prefer to not answer instead of saying no.
Correct.
So,
correct. If you get
and
nothing,
that
it's probably a
European
no.
people, yeah, and that we in Europe, we are not very used to it because we prefer to get no than to be ignored. So,
I hear you, and that's a
because in
cultural
this
thing.
way
We're very polite.
maybe my mail ended in spam, so I continue, I press and continue and press, and so it's no, it was just the exchange of ideas that we have with Jan last time. I have also another question with the networking. You said, do you publish somewhere a list of events where that you attend, so we can see where you will be officially presented? I don't know, with some stands or I don't know, corners, not only like visitors, but where there will be some more official representation.
Sure. We don't post a calendar of where we're going, mostly because it's very last minute. For me to get budget to approve to go to an event, sometimes it's very last minute before I even know that I'm going. If I'm going to give a big presentation at an event, we may publish that I'm like, if I'm the main speaker or something like that, then we may put that up. But if I'm just attending a conference, we don't have anywhere where you can see that. Mostly it's large trade shows, so large events in sectors, trade shows. There will be some sort of government presence. Again, you've got municipal, federal, and provincial governments, 3 levels of government in Canada, and so you'll have representatives from different governments that will attend, but we normally don't post in advance that we're attending those. So it is a bit of a trial and error. If you start with the big shows, there are lists of events in Canada, trade show events, not on Canada's government website, but if you use third-party events, which will show you where there are, or find the big convention centers. Like here in Halifax, we have the Halifax Convention Center. It's the big event center in the city. If I go on their website, I'll see all the lists of the events that they're going to have. So if I were you, I would look at big Canadian cities: Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, maybe Halifax. Depending on your sector, and think of where to attend. But
this is I'm asking because we are planning a mission from the Extra Light project to Canada in next year, of course, and we would like to target, of course, some trade fairs. And our sector is lighting, furniture, building. Let's say if we want to speak in a bigger framework, so we will for sure go through this list to select the most representative for us and, let's say, the most interesting. So we will look for.
It may depend. Like for federal government wise, for lighting, it would be people who are working in building maintenance or in construction, that type of thing. So I would look maybe even construction conferences. Construction is a huge industry. We have one just this weekend, the Newfoundland Construction Conference we're attending this weekend. So you may find that at construction events, there may be room for lighting or building management services, things like that. Could be types of trade shows that I would look for.
Great, thank you.
And yeah, you can follow up with individuals. To your other question as well, yes, in Canada we're very polite. Sometimes when it's a no, we avoid the situation to not say. And yes, you're right. I spent a couple of summers in northern France, and we get a very no or a yes, and it's just a different way things work. You can follow up. Like what I find normally is appropriate is you send an email. You wait a week or two. If you don't hear anything, a follow-up is okay. If you don't hear anything after the second follow-up, it's probably a no. And then you could probably stop with, but it's not,
Okay.
it's not unwelcome. You're not, people aren't going to get a bad opinion of you. Like, it's normal, where people are used to hearing, I mean, look, it's in our presentation. I've got it here. I give this to businesses across Canada, telling them to use this service. So it's certainly, certainly welcome to contact people that way.
And actually,
And then-
Jonathan,
yeah.
I've tried to find you in the GADS website, and I can't find you.
I'm not there. Oh
I-
no, I should be there. I think I looked at myself and saw it the other day. It's hard for me because when I go to GEDS, I actually get the internal, it flips me over to the internal website. So see if I can find myself. That's interesting. I should be there.
Yeah, I put the
I'm
links
there.
to JETS and to Indigenous Business Directory on chat. So just Jonathan, if you can have a look
Okay.
at if they are the correct ones.
Sure. GEDS. So I just put a link. I'm not sure if you're able to open that. That might be, it's, you notice how it says GC directory? For me, it says GC directory because I'm acting it, I'm looking at it internally, but I am there. My page is there. Outreach officer. So perhaps you misspelled my name.
This link doesn't open, but when I
won't
go
open.
on the more public site, there is two Hébert, Émilie, and Martin, but there is no.
Oh,
Jonathan.
I have no accent. Il n'y a pas d'accent sur mon E.
Yeah, I've
There's no
tried
accent.
both.
Oh, okay.
I've tried both actually because I was
Yeah,
I
okay.
was kind of anticipating that, and no, I don't know. I can find you, but.
Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe there's a difference between the internal and the external page, because I'm looking at myself here in any way. But there's a good proof that it's not perfect. The site is not perfect. You're not going to always find what you need. So play with it, see what you can find. And if you don't hear from anybody on that list, don't take it personal. The other thing is, you'll notice on the slide, I say PSPC regional offices. So that's us. So we can also help sometimes with context. We're not going to like do a full research for you and find everybody you need to find in the country and this and that. But if you're looking for key folks in certain industries, we can help. We are organized regionally, however. So I am Procurement Assistance Canada Atlantic region. So I have a specialist knowledge of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, our eastern provinces. But if you're interested in the larger markets in Canada, in Toronto or in Montreal, we have teams that are there to do that as well. I'm going to pop this in the chat here.
Apparently Bart was able to find you, so it's just me who's not.
Oh, we found me. Okay, there I am there.
I don't understand.
Outreach officer. I wasn't previously though at Coast Guard. I spent 2 years at Coast Guard and my name never appeared in that directory. So it just shows you some departments are more ahead than others. Okay, moving on. So as you begin to promote your company, ask yourself these key questions. They will help you identify and target different potential client groups. What does your research tell you about your end users' needs? It's important to know what the government needs and what the government wants to buy. So you can do research on what the government buys, and we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. Who are the appropriate points of contact in or outside the government? Are they individual departments or is it PSPC? Selling to the government of Canada is like selling to a marketplace of over 100 different entities. So it's important to find out who does the buying. Yes, there's a central buying arm, but there's 100 different departments and agencies that are buying directly. And the last question is, do you want to be prime or subcontractor? In some cases, you may want to consider partnering with another company to become part of a larger company supply chain. Other examples of partnering with big companies in Canada is we have a lot of large contracts like related to shipbuilding, for example. We have Irving here in Halifax is doing a large shipbuilding contract. There are tons of opportunities to get into Irving's supply chain who are building those vessels. So for example, for a lighting perspective, they're going to have lighting all over those vessels, but Irving owns the contract for that shipbuilding. So you need to get into Irving's supply chain if you're going to supply the lighting for the vessels, for example. Okay, low dollar value procurement. So we talked a bit about this already, but majority of contracts below 25,000 for goods and below 40,000 for services are done in a non-competitive way. That's not 100% of the time. If a department goes out and they say we're going to make a tender for $20,000 for a good, and we would like to have a competitive process for that because we want to see what's going to come from that process, they can post it. They can go that route. It's just most departments are not looking to create more work for themselves unless necessary, unless they think that the competition will be stiff for that, and they may be able to save some money. The aim is to get the best value for Canadians while enhancing access, competition, and fairness for businesses. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So the non-competitive approach. So in order to have a procurement that does not have a competitive process, there has to be a reason that's given to not have a competitive process. And here are the reasons. So the first one is pressing emergency. So the delay could jeopardize public interest. So COVID was an excellent example of this. My department pivoted from doing these presentations to going out and buying vaccines and masks and hand sanitizer from around the world in an emergency manner. And so for a lot of those big mask purchases that we did and things like that, we didn't put out a tender. We just went out and bought them because we needed them immediately. Same thing, the example they give here, boats needed for an emergency evacuation. If we have someone out in the ocean and we need to go get them and we don't have a vessel nearby and we need to charter a vessel, we're going to do it without a request for a proposal. We're going to go out and get that vessel immediately. Low dollar value. So that's the under 40,000 for services, under 25,000 for goods. So for low dollar value, you don't have to have a competitive process, although you can. Third example is not in the public interest. So for national security. So for example, if the Department of Defense tomorrow decides that they're going to change their security system on a Canadian Forces base, well, maybe we won't put a request for proposal with all of the information about our security system for defense. That it wouldn't be in the national security interest. So that would be a reason. And the last reason is one known supplier. So if we know that there is one supplier of a particular good that we need. Now this may come into play for you folks when I start talking about international opportunities. One known supplier is important, and we'll get to that when we get to the Canadian content page. But if we do know there's one known supplier, we can do that. What will often happen is we'll put a notice out and say, we're going to purchase from this one supplier. And if nobody says anything in 2 weeks, or however the length of time we put it out, then we make the purchase. But if we put that out and we say this is the one supplier, it gives businesses a couple of weeks to see that, and business may say, no, I also offer that good or service, and you can submit that. And if it comes out that there is more than one supplier, then that contract will be scrapped, and they'll put out a competitive procurement immediately for the businesses to compete. Okay, so now we move over to competitive procurement. So procurement over 25,000 for goods and 40,000 for services is done through solicitation of bids and quotes from potential suppliers. So we're going to go through a few types here. The most common ones, you've got requests for proposal, which is used to solicit goods or services. It includes the specifications of the goods or services required, and it describes the evaluation criteria that will be used to choose the winning bid. For complex requirements, suppliers may be invited to propose a solution to a problem, requirement, or objective. So requests for proposals can look different depending on what they are, but it will have a specific requirement. It'll state how you have to get to that requirement, and it will also give you the evaluation criteria. We're going to go into detail a little bit later about different evaluation criteria. But it's important to look at that because sometimes the evaluation criteria is lowest price. Whoever can give this to me at the lowest price. But that's not always the evaluation criteria. There's all kinds of complicated ways of how we evaluate things, but that process will be well defined and put in the documents at the outset so that you know how it will be evaluated. The other two are standing offers, requests for standing offer and request for supply arrangement. Now, in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the differences of standing offers and supply arrangements, but they are mostly used as a way to have pre-qualified suppliers or bidders for specific goods or services. So the tender notices that you see posted, which we'll talk about a little bit later, will note what kind of tender it is. So it may say a request for a proposal, and then it'll give you the commodity that they're purchasing. Or it will say a request for a standing offer or request for a supply arrangement. Okay. So standing offers. So when a buyer needs to purchase goods or services on a repetitive basis, they may choose to establish a standing offer. A request for a standing offer is used to solicit standing offers. So the actual request, RFSO, as we would call it. Suppliers who meet the evaluation criteria stated in the RFSO become pre-qualified suppliers and holders of a standing offer. So it's kind of like an initial step. If you go through the process and you are successful, you become on a list for a standing offer, a list with other suppliers who are also qualified on that list. The standing offers an agreement with a pre-qualified supplier to provide goods and or services at pre-arranged prices under set terms and conditions when and if required. It's not a contract until the buyer issues a call up against the standing offer directly to a pre-qualified supplier. The call up document serves as a notice to the supplier to deliver the goods or provide the service. And then a contract is entered in each time a call up is issued. It could be valid for 1, 2, 3 years. It depends. It will state what the period of the standing offer in the actual document. And again, it's not a contract. It's an agreement to offer a certain good at a certain price. So the key point here is the price. So for the standing offer, we'll say for this year, you will offer us, a box of pens at $10 for that box of pens. And every time we call you, we may never call you, but we may call you once a month and say, I need that box of pens for $10. And every time you're going to give it to me for $10. That's an example of a standing offer. Oh, yes, here we go. Supply arrangement. So,
Jonathan?
yes,
Jonathan,
go ahead.
Sorry. Within the standing offer, so let's say, and I take your example of a box of pencils. Let's say there are 3 suppliers that have answered and are ready to answer the standing offer. How does it work? Like, now the government need to order a box of pen. Do they arbitrarily choose one of those 3 suppliers, or every time they ask those 3 suppliers to position themselves?
It's up to them. It's up to the buyer. So the way that it works is we'll say for a specific good, it may be mandatory to use the standing offer. So one that I know is mandatory is video production services I did recently. And if you want to get a video done for the government, you got to use this list of 10 companies that are on the list. You can pick anyone. And how you're going to choose that is different for every buyer. I might just look at the list and say, yep, that name I recognize, and I'm going to use them. I might look at the list and say, okay, I want to find one that, I like the type of work that they do. And I might research, look at their websites. Every buyer or person who's doing the buying is different and has a different approach. Personally, I would probably do some research and look into those companies and figure out which one I personally like the best or I think is going to do the best job. Someone else may be in a rush, especially if it's just for pens or a chair or something like that. And they might just go with the first company they see. It really depends. There's no requirement to pick any particular company. Anybody who's on the list can be contacted for the call up. Okay, so next is supply arrangement, which is similar to standing offer. The big difference for supply arrangement is that the price is not determined. So we might say, okay, you're going to, give us the box of pens when we need it, and every time we need a box of pens, we'll contact you, and we're going to negotiate the price for that box of pens when it comes. Box of pens is probably not a very good example. That would be a standing offer because it's something simple like that. A supply arrangement might be something where the cost is going to vary depending on the service. If, say gas prices are important for the transportation of a service or things like that, there could be a variance in cost. It could be that in the supply arrangement, they may even put a cap on it. They may say, okay, the cost is not determined, but it can't exceed $100. Or something like that. There could be provisions in there in a supply arrangement, but very similar to a standing offer. It's a list of pre-qualified companies for particular goods and services. How we procure different goods and services depends region to region, but we have national standing offers for certain products. So if I go to buy an office chair tomorrow, I need to use the standing offer for the office chair. That's a commodity that we have as a national standing offer. So you can use our search tools that we have, we'll go through in a little bit, to go through and explore standing offers and supply arrangements and see what types of commodities we have under standing offers and supply arrangements. It may even be that we have certain types of commodity under a standing offer, while other types we don't. And so I've seen that where some companies, some of the products they sell, they're going to go through an approach for a standing offer, but other products they sell, we don't have standing offers for those. So a little bit of research can go a long way there. Okay, methods of supply. So we have various different, I'll say, databases of tenders that we offer for specific types of procurements. So it may not be relative to the relevant to this group, but I'll go over it very briefly so you're aware of it. Pro services. So Pro services is a database of professional services. So it has about 150 different streams and categories. IT and non-IT professional services. So sometimes, even if you're a seller of goods, you may find that some of the services that you offer related to those goods would be a professional service, and it may be on that list. How do you know if you're on the list or not? Well, you look at the list of, there's about 150 streams and categories. If the good or if the service that you offer is in that list of 150, then you absolutely have to go through pro services in order to offer that service to government. I have found a lot of companies that sell goods, but then they also service the goods that they sell, and that servicing of the goods may be covered under pro services. It depends. Depends on the type of service, but mostly it's IT related services and HR related services that are in pro services. There's also, you'll see task-based informatics, tasks and solutions, professional services. So we have different databases that are task and solutions based, where we don't always know the answer. And we may say, okay, we need to figure out this, cybersecurity problem. We don't know the answer, but this is what we need. We need to overcome this problem. And then companies can go in and provide solutions to those problems. And that's how they win the contract, is to provide a solution. This one actually may be of use to you, Select. So Select is our database for construction projects. Now, I don't think there's anybody on the call who's going to respond to a multi-million-dollar construction project. However, you may want to be part of that construction project. The lighting companies here may be part of that. So you may not be responding to a tender directly for the government of Canada, but you want to be aware of who has won the tenders and who are those companies and who can you work with. So Select is the database where those where you can apply for those types of things. But you can also find those, like all those opportunities that are being posted to Select are going on to our government tender service that we'll look at in a few slides. So you can use those search tools to not only find current opportunities, but find opportunities that have been awarded already. And that maybe give you some ideas of companies to contact. Like, for example, if you look and you see that Palmer Lowe won the company or the bid for the building in Moncton that I mentioned, you may decide, well, maybe we should contact Palmer Lowe and ask them if they have a lighting contractor, somebody who's doing lighting in their building, or if there's an opportunity for us there. So that would be covered under Select. Then we have Directory of Linguistic Service Providers. There's a lot of linguistic stuff related to the Government of Canada. I will touch on this very briefly just for official language reasons. Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. All government services at the federal level must be offered in English and in French. So that's why you have someone like me who does presentations in English and French. But it also means that you can respond to tenders in those languages, but it also means that you may find for some requirements that you will see bilingualism requirements. So like, I'm not exactly how sure I may apply it to you, but for example, if there are things on your products like warning labels or even just how to use this product, it needs to be available in English and in French in Canada, and the label has to be provided in English and French. We often run into that with US companies that'll come up and they're not aware of that requirement and they go, well, I have to put French on my labels. Yes, you have to put French on your labels in Canada. So that's important, but we also do translation, interpretation, different services related to that.
And that's when they use Google Translate and the label doesn't mean anything.
No. And honestly, as a note, if you want to sound real good for the locals, is have a look and look a little bit at the terminology of the items that you use. I spent 2 years in northern France working at World War I memorials for Canada and northern France, and the French that I learned there was a little bit different, and some things can be different. And so if it doesn't matter, you could put any language, any type of French on your labels. But if you really want to stand out to the locals, then adding in a little bit of local Canadian French would be welcome, I'm sure.
And,
so,
Jonathan, if you're selling some goods or, well, mainly goods, I will say, but services maybe to some extent, but let's say goods that require some training, the same applies, right? You need to be able to provide a training to the people both in French and English.
Correct. And that requirement may change across the country. So while Canada is a bilingual country, not all of the regions of Canada are bilingual. So sometimes that requirement you mentioned may be different depending on the tender that you're going to across Canada. And it can be really tricky. So for example, my department here in Atlantic Canada is bilingual because we have New Brunswick as part of our region. And New Brunswick is a bilingual province. In other departments, like for example, fisheries has a Nova Scotia specific region that's just for Nova Scotia. That region is not bilingual. It is a unilingual English region because it does not include New Brunswick. So for a tender that goes into that region, you may not see a requirement to have French training, but if it included New Brunswick, you may see that it does require. So just a note to read the document, see what the requirements are, and you may find French language requirements in the documents. And the last one on the list is temporary help services. So
and sorry,
yeah, oh, sure,
sorry,
go ahead.
Jonathan, just to conclude on that subject, I had a question on Tuesday and I wasn't sure how to answer.
Sure.
So do you, and I don't know if you were going to address that later, but do you have in some instances some RFP that will require the company to share their financial statement to make sure that it's a financially sound company when they answer the tender? And if yes, in that instance, do those financial statements need to be available both in French and in English?
Good question. Maybe. They may require, will they actually ask the financial statements? I'm not sure, but the question you ask is relevant. Will they look to see if you're, financially stable? They may do a credit check for your company, but also just doing some history themselves, some work, and seeing how long have you been in business? Who are your clients? How much have you done before? Those things are important to the Canadian government. How established you are would be a part of the evaluation criteria. It may or may not matter. If it's just lowest price is the winner, it may not matter. But in one of the ones where we have evaluation criteria and we give points for technical, we give points for who, your workforce, we might give points for how many years you've been in business, things like that. There may be a requirement in some of those to prove that you have a certain bit. And so maybe that you would see an example for financial statements or something like that. It's possible. I would be surprised if they made you provide them bilingually unless it was part of the actual process, like you needed it for the process itself. I say that because there is an example recently of, for example, architecture drawings for construction projects that were not provided in French, and so sometimes they do, and it will note whether it has to be provided in. The short answer to my question to you is maybe, and read what's required. It may be required, but it's so varied, it changes that you have to keep an eye on it. But I will say that there has been more discussion recently about official languages in regarding the documents that are provided. And so I think you'll see more attention to detail in that regard, where it's very clearly stated what you need to provide for each tender process.
Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, so the last one on the list is temporary help services. So we contract, admin support security, various different things as a temporary temporary help. So those are the different methods of supply that we have that are outside of just a regular RFP, a request for proposal. Okay, federal procurement websites. So you've decided